Brooklyn, how are we feeling? Yeah. True story. I don't know if Rachel remembers this, but we had a friend in common whose roommate had somehow become really good friends with Dee Dee Ramone. And I remember being 19 or 20 years old in a Barnard dormitory room celebrating Dee Dee Ramone's 50th birthday. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah, absolutely transcendent moment in my life, and I just was reminded of that with what Rachel was saying. And then after school, I lived here in Brooklyn for a couple of years. I remember eating borscht at S&B. I don't know if S&B is still around. I remember going to the Greenpoint Tavern and having Budweiser because they had 6 taps at the Greenpoint Tavern and every single one of them poured Budweiser. So that was all that you were gonna do. Drinking out of a big 32-ounce styrofoam cup. That was the only size you could get the beer in. Really good memories of playing in bands, working. We worked an art handling job at this place called Headley's Humpers. I don't know if anybody has heard of that. Humping art, which is a British term. It doesn't mean what you Americans think it means. Really great friendships, really amazing people, really important part of my life. And so many of you here in Brooklyn helped us when we were running in Texas. And I see one of these great Beto por Texas shirts. Folks who donated $5 or $10, people who actually picked up and moved themselves and their lives to Texas to knock on doors and to engage people in one of the most important races in the history of the state. And you complimented the work that we were doing, going to every single one of the 254 counties of Texas, going to the biggest, bluest places so that they knew that they were not taken for granted. We went to show up, to listen to them, to include them in the conversation for the future of this country. But we also went to the small, rural, red places. Places so red you can see them glowing from outer space as you orbit planet Earth. Places that voted for Donald Trump 96% in the last election. But places, I hope you agree with me, that are every bit as deserving of our attention, of our respect, of being listened to, heard, fought for, and served. And the only way we were going to be able to do that is to show up where they were and listen to them. Show up with the courage of our convictions, talking about every issue that mattered to us, talking about healthcare, meaning that you have access to a primary care provider, a psychiatric nurse practitioner, yes, meaning that in Texas, where the largest provider of mental health care services was the county jail system, the largest inpatient provider of mental health care services was the Harris County Jail. That universal health care also meant that you could see a psychiatrist or a psychologist and be well enough to live to your full potential. And no matter where we were in the state, we also said that healthcare means every single person making their own decisions about their own body and having access to the care that makes that possible. Yes. Not despite, but because of running on a bold, progressive agenda and running literally everywhere. Going to places that no Democrat had been in decades. Going to Archer County, home of Larry McMurtry, home of Lonesome Dove and The Last Picture Show, home to a community that was last visited by a Democrat running for Senate in 1948, when Lyndon Baines Johnson dropped out of the sky in a helicopter, landed on the courthouse grounds, and then walked over to the American Legion Hall and listened to those that he wanted to represent and serve before asking for their vote. It had been 70 years since someone had shown up, but we showed up and we walked into Mern's Cafe and we said hi to all 12 people who'd shown up to see us as well. 20 if you include the 8 innocents who were having breakfast there when we walked in. But at the end of the day, though we did not defeat Ted Cruz, we were down 2.6 at the end of the night. We won more votes than any Democrat in the history of the state of Texas. We won independence for the first time in decades. Brought 500,000 Republicans who voted for Greg Abbott, a Tea Party conservative for governor, and voted for us on the same ballot. And we saw young voters turn out at a 500% increase during early voting in Texas. Forever changed. Democracy transformed. A state that had ranked 50th in voter turnout. Not by accident, but by design. Not because we like our democracy any less than you do here in New York, but because we were drawn that way. People based on their race or their ethnicity, drawn out of a congressional district to diminish the power of their vote or the likelihood that their voice would ever be heard. We were showing up for them, and they were standing up to be counted. And now that state, which elected 2 new Democratic members of Congress to help flip the House of Representatives, that state which changed the composition of its state legislature, that state that elected 17 African American women to judicial positions in Harris County, literally changing the face of criminal justice in the process. That state and its 38 electoral college votes are now at the table. And we're part of the conversation, and we're part of the path to defeat Donald Trump in 2020 and to bring this deeply divided and highly polarized country together again in 2021, because we face the greatest challenges we have ever known as a country. And Rachel was talking about some of them. How in the world did a country of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees decide that we were going to put little children in cages? We were going to deport their mothers and their fathers back to the very countries from which they fled. They survived a 2,000-mile journey to come to the wealthiest, the most powerful place on the planet. And we met them with cruelty and something that is tantamount to torture. Not only must we free those children, resolve never again to separate another family, we must move every mountain, pay every price to make sure that we reunite every single family, and then rewrite this country's immigration laws in our own image to reflect the beauty, the diversity, the genius of this country. A country that is comprised of people of the planet who have found a home here. And that means not only ensuring that we follow our laws and our own moral compass when it comes to these asylum seekers, and especially to these children. It also means that no dreamer, more than 1 million strong, ever has to fear deportation back to a country they do not know, where they don't speak the language, where they no longer have family, where if we send them back and they're successful against those long odds, that success will accrue to that place, not to this one. Every dreamer freed from that fear by being made U.S. citizens in this, their true home country. What do you all think? Yeah? We could do that. We can make sure that those people that we're meeting along the campaign trail, who just want to be well enough to be able to contribute to their full potential, afford prescription medications, be able to take their child to a therapist, see a family planning provider in a state like mine that has closed down more than 1/4 of family planning clinics, meaning not only is there not safe legal access to an abortion, but try getting a cervical cancer screening, or seeing a family planning provider, or seeing a provider of any kind in a state that failed to expand Medicaid. Not only are we not living up to the law and our rights in this country, we are contributing to a maternal mortality crisis that is 3 times as deadly for women of color. So not as Democrats, not as Republicans, not as independents, but as Americans first before we are anything else, let's make sure that we fight for and win guaranteed, high quality, universal health care for every single one of us. You all with me on that? And then go into places like Pacific Junction in the southwestern part of Iowa, about 1 mile from the Missouri River. There you go. A community that has never before meaningfully flooded in the history of the community. But we visited there last month, and every single structure, every home, every possession within it, underneath water. Though they're 1 mile from the Missouri River, the river basin saw the greatest runoff in its history. Unlike any other time in North America, we're seeing that there. We're seeing it along the Mississippi. We're seeing 58 inches of rain, the landfall record in Houston, Texas, the 3rd 500-year flood in that community in just 5 years. These storms, these floods, these droughts, these fires, caused not by God, nor by Mother Nature, but by all of us, by you and by me. Our excesses, our emissions, our inaction in the face of the facts and the science. What if we decided that not by half measure or half step or only half the country, we were going to ask every single one of us to do all that we can to confront climate change while we still can. In the 10 years that are left to us, free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, fully embrace renewable energy technology, allow farmers to do their part, planting cover crops and using precision till farming to capture more carbon out of the air and disturb less of it that's in the soil. If we do that and lead by example, this country can take its rightful place as the indispensable nation, convene the other powers of the planet to make sure that we do not warm another 2 degrees Celsius, after which the places that we call home today will no longer support life. But if we do meet that challenge, not only will we have met the test of this moment, but we will have created high value, high wage, high skill jobs. We will have made sure that our kids, looking back on us, the people of 2019 and 2020, ask themselves not, who were those pendejos back then? But instead, say that I'm proud of my mom and my dad, my grandparents, when it really counted. When everything was on the line, they were there for me in every succeeding generation. I guarantee you, any challenge we face, whether it's climate, whether it's healthcare, whether it's rewriting this country's immigration laws, or making sure that this great economy works for every single one of us, and we do not have strangers in our own country looking in from the outside on this success, I know that if we resolve to do so, if we do not write anybody off, if we do not take anyone for granted, we absolutely can accomplish this. We just have to believe in ourselves in this moment. I believe too, yeah. And look, if there were ever a test for that belief, following a president who describes Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, who has vowed to ban all people of one religion from the shores of this country that is comprised of people from every tradition of faith and walk of life across the world, someone who calls Klansmen very fine people, or asks duly elected representatives of Congress who happen to be women of color to go back to their own country. That smallness, that weakness, that racism, that bigotry, and that hatred has to be met with the courage and the confidence, the ambitions and the aspirations, the resolve, the creativity, and the hard work of this country, every single one of us coming together. Are you ready to do that work? Well, I am ready to do it with you, and I gotta tell you, everything that you're doing right now is powering this campaign. We don't accept a dime from a single PAC or corporation or special interest or lobbyist. It's all people, it's all our fellow Americans making this happen. And your contributions help us to reach them in Iowa, in Nevada, in New Hampshire, in South Carolina, and right here in New York City. Just know that your belief and your faith in us in this campaign, we're making the absolute most of it. And at the end of the day, we'll look back on moments like this one and remind ourselves that we decided we were going to win right here in this room together, every single one of us. So thank you so much for everything that you all are doing for us. We are so grateful. I want to thank Emily Duff, who's going to follow us right now. I want to thank Windbreaker. I want to thank all the musicians and the bands and every one of you who made this possible. Shay and The Well, thank you for having us out. We'll see you guys down the road. Les agradezco. Gracias. Bye-bye.